Good day, markers. I'm the grade 11 English senior teacher, and this video is just to provide you with some further guidelines in addition to the marking guide regarding marking the grade 11 English paper 3 exam, which, as you know, consists of a creative essay and 2 transactional writing pieces. So when it comes to both the essays and the transactionals, make sure you're very, very familiar with the rubrics. So when you are awarding marks, but also prior to beginning this marking, read through the criteria for each of the categories. And remember that it will not be 100% aligned with the child's work. As an example, I'm just going to scroll down to the rubric for essays. And we're just going to look at one of the subcategories. So let's say we look at moderates, 18 to 16 and 15 to 13 also falls under this category, but we'll look at the higher end of the moderates category. And we're looking at content and planning. Have a look at what the criteria says. It says a satisfactory response. So neither great, but not bad. Ideas are reasonably coherent and convincing. It's reasonably organized and coherent, including introduction, body, and conclusion. These won't always align 100% with the child's work, but that doesn't mean you can't award in this category. So, as an example, if we're looking at the essay rubric category, skillful for content, so that would be the 24 to 22 or the 21 to 19, other way around. Let's say that all of this is true of the child's work, what I've highlighted, all of that criteria is true, but when it says it's well organized and coherent, including intro, body, and conclusion, that's not quite true because this child basically repeated the introduction in their first paragraph. They can still be awarded from this category. It doesn't have to align 100%. Another example, let's say we're looking at structure and we're looking at the moderate category, which for structure would just be 3. And it says here, relevant details developed, but in the child's essay, that's not 100% true because, for example, there was a character who was introduced, but they played no role in the plot and didn't actually need to be there. The child can be still awarded from that subcategory. So it really doesn't have to align 100%. It sort of needs to be a case of, yes, this is more or less true for the most part. Okay, so apply all of this criteria gently. Okay, we need to bear in mind that these are 16, 17-year-olds, so we're not expecting a masterpiece. When it comes to both essays and transactionals, you're only going to award from the exceptional and skillful categories if it's very good to excellent. And again, bearing in mind that's very good to excellent for a teenager. Okay, so like I say, we're not expecting masterpieces, but to get a mark awarded from those higher categories, it has to be, like I say, very good to excellent. When it comes to the inadequate and elementary categories, very rare that you award from there. If you work out what this equates to out of the 30 marks percentage-wise, you'll see what I mean. It's very, very low marks. It's essentially failing marks. So that's only if the child's work is very poor, by which I mean their language errors in all sentences. Language errors actually impede the meaning. The child's completely off topic. There's no paragraphing whatsoever, or the sentences are very flawed in the way they've been structured. Bearing in mind as well, when it comes to transactionals, if you're going to award from the inadequate or elementary categories, that's when the format's very, very flawed. Okay, bearing in mind, it's very rare for the format to be perfect, and we don't actually look for perfection. So with reference to content and planning and the language and structure, all of those subcategories in the rubrics, make sure you understand what you're actually looking for in that category, what you're awarding marks for. For example, if we look at content and planning, it's very much organization of ideas. Did the child think this through? Did they go into it with intention? It's awareness of purpose, audience, and context. Again, I'm just referring to the essay rubric, but you need to apply this thinking to the transactional rubric too. Does the child show an awareness in how they've used language of what they're actually trying to achieve with this text, of who's going to be reading this text, that kind of thing. It's a very good idea as well as you go to work out the percentage as you go. So let's say you're marking the transactional and you decide based on the criteria and based on the child's work, you decide for the content category, you're going to award a 7 out of 15. Work out what 7 out of 15 is in percentage and consider, is that fair? It just gives you a nice broad overview of whether or not you have actually accurately and fairly awarded a mark. Sometimes you can have awarded what comes to 50% using the rubric, but when you look at the work holistically, you actually think, no, this is more of a 60%. And then you can go back to the rubric and just check that you weren't perhaps a bit too strict. Just a few notes. We don't penalize too harshly for language. Okay. Yes, we're looking at how the child uses language to convince, to persuade, etc., but it's rare/never the case that a child's language use is perfect. Again, we have to bear in mind their cognitive level at their age, the level of schooling that they're at. There's no penalization around word count. If it's too long or too short, the children essentially penalize themselves because it will affect the content category and even structure. As an example, a very long essay tends to start waffling. So in that case, the child's content and potentially structure will be affected. So there's no penalization around not abiding by the word count or even not including a word count. The children should be following the writing process of planning, writing, drafting, editing, etc. However, even if the child hasn't shown any signs of planning in terms of there is no mind map or anything available, remember you can still ascertain whether or not they plan from their actual writing. If they haven't included any planning, but there's a very logical flow to their essay, they've used the topic in quite creative, imaginative, unusual ways, their final piece is quite polished, then they have planned. Okay, so please don't think that, if the child hasn't included their planning in their submission, they can't be awarded moderate, skillful, or exceptional for content planning and format. They can. All right. In terms of transactionals, the whole point of what we're actually assessing is, can a learner write to a topic bearing audience and purpose in mind? Can they use language for a specific output? So again, bear that in mind when you're assessing, because it also gives you quite a holistic idea of what we're looking for. When it comes to essays, the point is, can the child use language imaginatively and creatively? So again, please bear that in mind when determining marks. I really recommend that when you mark, you read the essay or the transactional once to get a high-level overview of it, and then you must read it at least once more when you're determining where you're going to be awarding marks in each category. Please, when you mark on the script that you're going to be annotating, please indicate the breakdown of the marks. So let's say we award a 7 and a 5. Please write C, P, F, or even just C, 7. L, S, E, or just L, 5, just so the learner can also get a clearer idea of how the marks were awarded. And this also helps with the moderation process. I just want to look at a few points at the top of the marking guide that are relevant. All right, so please note, we don't deduct marks for the type of essay written. Let's say that the child's introduction makes it very clear they're writing an argumentative essay, but as the essay goes on, it's actually a bit more discursive. We don't penalize for that, okay? Generally, we expect that the child, based on the topic chosen, will ascertain what kind of essay it could be. Let's say, they choose one of the pictures of let's say the one of the dog. Okay, you would assume then, as written here, it's going to be something narrative or descriptive. But like I say, we don't expect them to stick to one completely throughout. We're not very harsh around that. So that's not something to worry about too much. And then also, just remember, your personal tastes and preferences mustn't play a role in how marks are awarded. And this is particularly true for the essay. Okay, you can read an essay and think, okay, well, I don't really enjoy violent war stories. But if it's a great essay, you have to take that out of the equation. Okay, so you'll notice for the essays and the transactional, some tips have been provided just to guide you, but they're very basic, they're very high level. A child could come up with something completely out of the box that is not mentioned here. That's fantastic. Okay. Please note if the child doesn't indicate which topic they've chosen for section A or B, you should be able to figure it out, especially in the case of transactionals, from what they've written. But sometimes a child won't indicate what essay topic they've chosen, and it's unclear which topic they're writing from. So if that's the case, please just comment and say, please in future include your topic number. And it will also affect content, not dramatically, maybe by, one category, but it will somewhat affect that if you look at the criteria in that content section. All right, you'll notice as well the transactional formats have been provided beneath each of the transactionals to guide you in your marking. Please note though, as with language, there's, a constant sense of it's not going to be perfect. That is not what we're looking for. Exceptional doesn't mean perfect. So if the learner mostly, for the most part, abided by the format, they can get a high mark. Okay, there can be some inconsistencies and they can still achieve very well. If we look at the topic 2.5, learners are required to write agenda and minutes. And I've already come across some learners who just did one of those things. So they just wrote the agenda or they just wrote the minutes. If they just wrote the agenda or just wrote the minutes and didn't do both, cap the mark at 50% essentially. So let's say they just did the minutes and it was really good. You could award, let's say, 12 out of 25. I know it seems harsh, but they haven't followed instructions and they haven't met the word count because they've only done half of the answer. And this was also communicated with them. So overall, please just mark kindly. Obviously, we can't be wildly lenient and we have to take into account that the mark has to be fair and an accurate reflection of the child's ability. But we're also going into this marking like I say, with a very kind perspective, as paper 3 is the paper that most learners get most marks from. So it's very important that we go into this just with a kind and gentle approach. Thank you very much and best of luck with your marking.